Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me now. Gotta love starting a live stream with no audio. And with that, we apologize for last week. We had a live stream scheduled, but as you can see, we had some technical difficulties right at the last minute that we just couldn't recover from, and I didn't have anything prepared. So we ended up having to cancel last week. So welcome to this week's live stream. My name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk. On the keyboard, I have my friend Angelo Juris, who is answering the questions that you guys have in the chat. So if you have anything as we're going through, any questions, throw them in the chat, and Angelo will try and get those to me. We use like a shared Google Doc, so I can kind of take a look over and see the questions that are being asked. It's been crazy, so I haven't uploaded the outline into the description of the video, but I will do that this afternoon. So maybe wait a couple hours after this if you want to grab the outline to follow along at your own time. And it's been a joy seeing some of the people post what they've been doing with these live stream series out on Facebook. Some of you post some pictures and some renderings and all that kind of stuff, and I'll be honest, that totally makes our day when we see that you guys are actually able to follow along and make the exact same things we're making. It makes us feel really proud to share our knowledge with you guys, and then you're sharing that back with us. So thank you very much. So let's go ahead and dive in. We left off last time we created this extension arm assembly. And then I'm just going to kind of finish this up, and we're actually really close to being done. We're going to finish this extension arm assembly and then move it to the other side, and that's pretty much the end of the miter saw stand. I'm probably going to do one more episode doing like exploded drawings, like you would see like an assembly drawing or something like that. So there'll probably be one more episode for this, and then I'll have to figure out something else to teach. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to share them in the chat on what you'd like to see, and we will try and make that happen. Okay, so we left off, we finished this little end part here on this roller, and now there's like a part that you can kind of flip up and over that acts as like a stop. So that's what we're going to be creating next. So I'm going to create a new, let me go ahead and activate this extension arm assembly. I'm going to create a new component called roller pin. So let me go ahead and move this over here. I definitely recommend you name your components. Makes things much easier to find. So I'm going to create a component called roller pin. And like I showed last time, I like to use some of these primitives. Instead of having to create a sketch, just to create a pin, instead of creating a sketch and then drawing a circle and dimensioning it and all kind of stuff, I can just get away with creating a cylinder. And I'm just going to do it on this front face right here, and kind of near where I need it to be. I'm just going to click over here somewhere. Okay, so let's go ahead and make that 11.5 in diameter, and then in length, I'm going to make that, or in height, I guess. And I showed this last time. I'm in millimeters right now. You can see that here. But I can also type in other units. So for example, 11.25 IN for inch. And you can see that it's going to do the conversion for me. So I don't have to use a calculator or anything like that. Okay. Then what we're going to do is chamfer these edges with a small chamfer. And let's just do maybe something like 0.5 millimeters or whatever. You can see it kind of deburrs the edges of that. Then I'm going to use the joint command to put it where I want it to be. Okay. So I'm going to change my motion type. I know I want it to be a revolute, and you'll notice there's two different tabs, the position and the motion. I like to kind of jump over here and say, well, I'm going to do a revolute joint. And then I'm going to come back here and specify how I want to position that. And hopefully you've seen enough of my live streams that I have a little saying that I use when I create these joints. Which one do I want to move, and where do I want to move it to? That's kind of how I remember. Well, this is the one I want to move, and I want to move it to this other part. So I know that it's asking for basically this rod right here. And you'll notice as I hover over this cylindrical face, I get like a start, a middle, and an end point. So I'm going to grab this middle point right here. And then I'm just going to come over to this cylinder here. And just like the other one, it has a start, a middle, and an end. So I'm going to grab the middle there, and you'll see that it positions it right where I need it to be, lined up in the center. Now, the last thing it's asking for is this snap. Well, actually, I guess, no, I already did that. So I'm going to go ahead and let's jump over to the motion. It'll be hard to see, but if I were to hit play, it's actually revolving. I can kind of see the shadow moving slightly, but I know that that's correct. And I'll say OK. So I've just positioned that roller pin. Now I'm going to activate my extension arm assembly because I'm going to create another new component here. And I'm going to create a sheet metal component. So I'm going to jump over to my sheet metal tab. And now you're going to see, why did I activate this top level assembly? Well, I need to create a sheet metal component, and I want it to be underneath this extension arm assembly. If I had left my roller pin active and I said sheet metal new component, it would have put it underneath this roller pin, and obviously that's not what I want. So I'm going to activate this guy. I'll say new component, and now you can see it's going to create a sheet metal component. Just like before, I can give it a name. I'm going to call this workpiece, stop. And I'm going to expand open this library. So you can see I've already done some sheet metal parts in this design. But if I expand open this library, I can see all of the different kinds of materials that I have. And I want to pick the stainless steel millimeter. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one there. Sorry, stainless steel millimeter. If I expand that open, I can see what the thickness is, what the K factor, etc. So that's a little tip. If you want to know what size that is, you can expand open any of these. Here's steel, you can see 2.5. If I expand, this guy open, you can see that's inch, 0.1, etc. So I'm going to say stainless steel millimeter. And now you can see I have a new sheet metal part underneath the extension arm assembly called workpiece stop. Okay. I love our sheet metal module. It allows you to create sheet metal parts very, very quickly. So I'm going to just start with a basic shape, like a rectangle, and then I'm going to start folding that shape. So start with a rectangle here. I want it to be 260 millimeters wide. 260 by 50 millimeters tall. And there is my shape. If I use this flange command, if I hover over it, you'll notice it's actually like multiple commands in one. So it can create sheet metal faces or flanges. Well, right now I don't have anything except for a profile, so I'm going to say flange. I'm going to click on that, and you'll see it's going to use my sheet metal rule, the material that I picked, and the thickness for it, and it's going to create a sheet metal component for me. Then I can come along and start, modifying this. So I could come up to this flange command, or I could pre-select. For example, I'm going to pre-select that back edge. I'm going to right mouse click. And you'll notice at about 4 o'clock is the flange command. So I don't even have to go up to the menu. So I pre-selected that edge. I'm going to right click and say flange. And I personally like to start to drag to kind of visually see what's going on. And you can see how it's going to bend that over. Okay, so for this, I want the height to be 13. You can kind of see how that updates. And then we have a lot of options here like angle, height datum, bend position, etc. I'm going to leave this to be outer faces. And if you don't know what these mean, I highly recommend watching my live stream on just the sheet metal module itself. I go into a lot of detail about what the height datum and bend positions mean. In fact, I even create like a cardboard box and show how to do like these folded cardboard boxes. So keep an eye out for that. In fact, I'll try and link that in the description of the video. So height datum, I'm going to say outer. Bend position, I'm going to say adjacent. And watch what happens when I say adjacent. You can kind of see how it moved up a little bit. So you can kind of see having different options here give me different results. And so I'm going to say adjacent, and that'll make more sense here a little bit as we keep going. I'll say OK. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing here. I'm going to click this front edge and say flange. I'll start to drag to kind of see what that looks like. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to do, instead of a full edge, I'm going to do a symmetric. And watch what happens when I do this. I get these arrows, and if I start to drag these arrows, you're going to see it's going to create a symmetric flange. And you'll also notice if I zoom up here, there's some bend reliefs. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But I want the distance to be 107 millimeters. And you'll see that kind of updates. So this is 107 millimeters wide right here. The overall height, I only want it to be 19 millimeters. So you can see how the height was shortened a little bit. We'll do outer faces. We'll do adjacent. But I don't want to have this corner relief like this. I want to do what's called a tear. So right here is override rules. I'm going to expand that open. And I want to do a bend relief override. So bend override would allow me to change like the radius of this bend right here. Bend relief is this little thing that you're seeing right here. So I'm going to check that on, and you can see bend relief is straight. Well, watch what happens if I go to round. You'll see that kind of changes to a round relief. Or if I go to tear, you kind of see it just doesn't have one at all. It's going to kind of tear the material there. And that's kind of what I want in this case. So I just did this bend relief override. And we'll say OK. Now think about, like, if I were to have to model this by hand without using sheet metal, yeah, totally doable, but man, that would take me some time and some effort. But all I really did was create a rectangle. We, thickened it with the flange command, and then I did the top flange, and then I did this bottom flange. Now I want to create some side tabs. So just like before, I'm going to pre-select that edge. And I'm going to come in here to flange. Now if I start to drag, watch what happens here. It starts to kind of give me a preview of what that's going to look like. Well, again, I don't want to do a full edge. Now last time I did a symmetric. This time I'm going to do what's called a 2 offset. And when I do a 2 offset, you'll notice my menu gets a little bit larger, and you see these references. So I can actually specify how far from this first reference do I want the tab to start. So for example, I could come in here and say, and you can see how they're labeled reference 1 and reference 2. So on this bottom one here, I want to come up 5.5 millimeters. So you can see I typed in minus 5.5 millimeters. And for this other offset, I want to do 22 millimeters. And you can see how it brought that way down. So I'm basically able to kind of put this tab where I want along that edge. And just like before, I don't want to have a bend relief. So I'm going to change that to a tear. And then the last thing I need to do is specify like how far does this tab come out, and that is this height. So we're going to say 40, and we can see that sure enough it creates that tab. Pretty quick and pretty easy. So I looked over at the questions that Angelo is bringing into this document, and he said, a question from Greg Hale, you mentioned a while back about doing a Cessna Skymaster drawing. Any chance of doing this in the future? And I think this is actually humorous because I thought about that this morning. I have them hanging up. In fact, let me switch to my camera here. I mean, I actually have them hanging up right here in my, my light and all that kind of stuff. So yes, Greg, I want to do that. I haven't had the time to do that, but it is on my list, and it might be a future upcoming one just because I was looking at it, no joke, this morning going, man, I really want to do that. So thanks for asking that, and kind of freaky that you were thinking what I was thinking today. So Steve asked, does Brad have ghosting turned off? And what I think he means by that is a preference. So let me go ahead and show this. I'm going to click on my preferences. And it takes a minute, or not a minute, it takes a second for it to kind of come up. And under the design, you'll notice show ghosted result body. I do have that turned off. And this is a personal preference of mine. If I were to have that turned on, let me go ahead and apply this. And it's been a long time since I've done this. If I were to, I think just making a physical change, like if I were to do a press pull, yeah, see now it's maybe not doing it. I might have to restart Fusion to have that happen, but I think it shows the original and then it shows the update or whatever. And I like to look at it just like I'm physically changing the model. I don't really personally like that ghosted result thing, so I have it turned off. So Steve, to answer your question, yes, I do have that turned off. And I mean, I personally recommend having it turned off, just a personal preference. So I'm going to turn that guy off. So, okay. So we created that tab. Now I want to fillet these edges. Now, I showed in a previous live stream that we have a really cool new fillet feature called full round fillet. Unfortunately, it doesn't work yet with sheet metal parts, and you can kind of see why. Like as I'm hovering over this face right here, you know, it kind of knows that that was originally this other face and all that kind of stuff. I do know that they're working on this to add it into the sheet metal, so I can't do a full round fillet right here. However, I'll show you a cool tip in case you can't do a full round fillet. I want to do a full round fillet here, so I'm going to go ahead and select that edge. But what do I need to type in for the distance? I have no idea. So I can click on these three little dots right here and say measure. Then I can click on an edge and watch what it does. It measured that edge and entered that number into there. So 22.5. Well, that's too big. I want half of that. So I'm going to come in here and say divided by 2. And now it took basically the length of this edge here and divided it by 2. And sure enough, I get that result. And let me go ahead and add in that edge there. And you can see I basically get a full round fillet. So once again, I was just clicking on these three little dots. It shows my last numbers I've entered in here, but then also that measure option. So cool little tip there. Okay. Then the last thing I want to do is to put a hole through here. And again, I love the hole command. So I'm going to come up here, say hole. I purposely click kind of away from where it needs to be, so you can kind of see I clicked up there, and that's where it showed up. Then I can click and drag, and you'll notice when I click and drag, I get these two little white dots that are below the circle there. This right dot is the center of my fillets over here. This left dot is the center of the whole face. You can almost think of it as the center or the centroid of that face. Well, all I have to do is get kind of near this dot, and you can kind of see it snap into place. It just clicks right into place. And I now know that that hole is perfectly centered with my fillets there. I didn't have to create a sketch, draw a circle, add dimensions, all that kind of stuff. All I need to do now is type in the correct diameter, 12, and then instead of a distance, I like to say go to a particular face. So I'm going to say go to, let's rotate around, let's click that face there, and it knows that it needs to drill all the way through to that face. And I might even say, let's just do a flat. I'll say okay. Now why did I say to that face? Well, if I ever change the thickness of this material, I always want that hole to go through. So if I made this a little bit thicker and I said only go 2 millimeters in, or 2.5 millimeters in, and we change it to a 4 millimeter thickness, it's not going to go all the way through. But by saying go always to this face, no matter how thick that face becomes, the hole will always go through it. So a neat little tip there. Okay, so I just spent some time creating this tab. Well, I want the same thing over here. And this is another thing that blows me away with our sheet metal is you can actually mirror features and it'll still unfold. And what do I mean by that? Well, check this out. I'm going to say unfold. I'm going to unfold all the bends. I click on this stationary entity and we can see that sure enough, everything unfolds. Okay. Well, now I need to mirror. But I created this kind of out in space somewhere, so I don't have, like if I turn on my origin, it's way over here somewhere. So I don't have a mirror plane. So I need to create one. So under construct, midplane. Creates a construction plane at the midpoint between two faces. Select two faces or planes. Okay. So I'm going to say this face here and this face here, and you'll see it created a plane between those two faces. I'll say okay, and then check this out. I'm going to come in here and say mirror. Now by default it says faces. I hardly ever use the faces. I almost always use features. So I'm going to switch to features. And I want to mirror the flange. So this last flange, in fact, you can kind of see when I hover over it, it kind of highlights the flange right there. I also want to mirror the fillets, and I want to mirror the hole. I don't need to mirror the construction plane, so I selected 3 features out of my timeline. What's my mirror plane? This is my mirror plane. Kind of gives you a little bit of a preview what that's going to look like. I'm going to say OK, and that mirrored over to the other side. Let me turn off my construction. Now, one thing I like to do is I want to say, is that still a sheet metal part? Well, I can check that by coming in here and saying unfold. What's my stationary entity? This guy here, and notice it still unfolds. So that's a verification that it is a valid sheet metal component. The fact that we were able to mirror that feature over to the other side, I just think is huge. Okay, don't like to have sharp edges here, so I'm going to select a couple edges and just fillet these. Let's just do maybe like a 5 millimeter fillet. So I'm going to grab a bunch of edges here. I think there's 6 in total. So I'm just going to kind of zoom up. Here's another trick. There's an edge here. If I just kind of get near it, you can kind of see it's because I'm in the fillet command, it allows me to kind of probe through and grab that fillet that's kind of hidden. Same thing with this guy here. I don't even have to rotate. I just kind of get where the edge is, and I'll go ahead and click. And we've added in all of those edges. In fact, 6 of them. And that is our sheet metal part. Didn't take very long to create. And if I were to try and model that by hand, yes, it's doable, but that would take quite a bit of time, quite a bit of effort, I think. So let's go ahead and position this in place. So I'm going to create a, I'm going to go ahead and activate my extension arm assembly, and let's just create a revolute joint. Because I want it to revolve around that pin So sure enough, revolute. Now, I want this to be centered. So I don't really have a location to pick, right? I mean, I could grab like here, but where on this pin does that go? So here is where between two faces really comes into play. So check this out. I'm going to say between two faces. And what's the first plane? I'll grab this guy here. What's the second plane? I'll grab that guy there. Okay. Now it doesn't look like anything happened, but watch what happens when I get near like the edge of this circle here. You can see the joint origin is now kind of in the middle on a plane. So it's basically creating a joint origin centered on this circle between those two faces. So all I have to do is click. So it created that point right there. Then all I have to do is, for example, hover over this rod or this pin and grab the center point there. And watch what this does. It positions it and it does a revolute joint. Let me go back here. And it perfectly locates it where it needs to be. Now I want to come back here and let's rotate this guy. Let's rotate it over onto this side over here, 90 degrees. Great, we positioned it. But as I zoom up, I notice an issue. And this is the power of fusion and using, for example, the sheet metal. We notice that it's clashing. So let's go back and edit this workpiece stop. And if I look at this, maybe I could shorten that a little bit, or maybe lengthen the arms, give it a little bit of extra room. There's not a lot of room right there. So I'm going to go back and edit this feature way back in time. This is where we created that flange. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that feature. Now it looks like it disappeared. Well, why did it look like it disappeared? Well, we went back in time and we went back before we positioned the part. So the part is back here where we originally created it. And maybe instead of 40 millimeters, we just add let's just add 10 more. So let's just go 50 millimeters. And you can see how that preview updated a little bit. And watch what happens when I say OK. Everything downstream updated. So the fillet, the hole, you notice the hole still in the correct location, the mirror, and all the small fillets, and the position where it needs to be. And we can see that sure enough, we have enough clearance now. So I was able to go back and make that change. And I just think that's huge. You might not know that it's going to clash until you start positioning these parts together. And you need to make that change. So if you like that, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't know about that, let me see. It looks like no questions. So, okay. So I saw AL had a comment about having a Zoom session. Let me switch to my camera here. Having a Zoom session after this. Unfortunately, I do have a hard stop at the top of the hour, so we can't do it on this one. But definitely keep an eye out. And in fact, I think it's already public out into the Fusion 360 Facebook group. We are doing a chat with the experts session, and it's going to be like myself and Angelo and Lars and Jeff, some guest speakers, all that kind of stuff. And it's just going to be this open forum where you can come in and join us and chat with us, maybe show off some of the stuff you've been working on, ask questions, that kind of a thing. So definitely keep an eye out for that. I think it's public now. So I'm going to give that as my answer to you, Al. So let's jump back in. Okay. So moving on here. So we got that where it needs to be. So what I want to do now, there's basically a sheet metal clip and a knob that kind of pins this extension arm into place. That's what we're going to be doing next. So gonna create a hole for that. So I activate my extension arm assembly. I'll use the hole command. In fact, I'm still in the sheet metal tab. It doesn't matter. I'm just gonna jump back to here, use the hole command. I click out where it doesn't make sense, and then I drag it to where it does make sense. So you'll notice that one dot in the center of that face, I'm just gonna go like that, and the hole is perfectly centered. I didn't have to reference anything or do any dimensions. It's so quick. I'm gonna do a 9mm hole for this. Again, instead of distance, I'm gonna say 2. And I'm gonna rotate a little bit. I'm just gonna click this inside face like that. So it's just gonna drill as far as it needs to. I don't want it to go into this other part. In fact, if I expand open objects to cut, I can see that it's only cutting one part. Okay. Some of this is pretty repetitive. I'm gonna bring in a McMaster car component. I want to bring in a nut, and again, to speed things up, I typed in the McMaster car number for that, so 90592 alpha 022, and I search for that. It actually finds the metric 8 medium strength steel hex nut. I can come in here and say I want this as like a step file. I can even say step file with no threads if I don't want any threads on it, but let's just leave it like that. I'll say download, and this is going to allow me to bring in this metric 8 nut. Now it brought it in at the origin, it usually does, so I'm going to bring it kind of where it needs to be. I could rotate it, but there's no need to. I'm just going to go ahead and say okay, and we'll create a rigid joint. Which one do I want to move? This is the one I want to move. So I'm just going to hover over like a circular edge, and you can kind of see it grabs that center point right there. Where do I want to move it to? I want to move it to this edge over here. So I'm going to click there, and you can see it instantly positions that part. Now some of you might be like, oh, I don't want the peak at the very top. Well, I can just rotate this, right? I don't have to leave that point at the very top. I could rotate that, 60 degrees or whatever. And say, okay. Okay. Now I'm going to create the sheet metal part. And again, I don't have a live example of this. I wish I could show you the finished, what it looks like. But it's basically a really thin piece of sheet metal that when you tighten down the knob, it kind of pinches in between here and basically keeps it from sliding up and down. It'll make more sense once we create the part. Now, I said some key words there. It's a very thin sheet metal part. In fact, only 0.6mm in thickness. So I'm going to jump back to my sheet metal, and under modify, I have this sheet metal rules. And in this design, I've got 2.5mm thickness, 2.5mm thickness. I'll expand open my library, and if I expand open all of these guys, you're going to see that I don't have anything that's 0.6mm in thickness, okay, except for the one that I've already created. So let me go ahead and delete that guy. So what I'm going to do is I want it to be stainless steel, so I'm going to hover over this stainless steel, and you'll notice two icons, the edit rule and new rule. So I could edit any existing rule, or I could say new rule, and it's going to copy the settings. So you can see it says stainless steel, it's 2.5. There's my K factor. Well, I'm going to come in here and say I want this to be 0.6. And I might even come in here and say let's make this like 0.6. That's just the description, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to leave everything else the same. I'm going to leave the K factor and everything else the same. I'll hit save, and now you'll notice, let me click up here, you'll notice I have a new material that's 0.06. If I expand that open, 0.06. So I can reuse any existing ones to help me make a new material. Okay. I'm going to create a sketch on this face here. I'll say create a sketch. I want to grab some information, so I'm going to project some information here. I want to know basically where this body is right here, so I'm going to project that guy. I'll say OK. And then this is a little bit of an approximation. I'm just kind of eyeballing what I want this to look like, but you'll notice I can snap to this edge here now. So I'm going to go ahead and click there. I'm going to come up a little bit, something like that. Come over. Oops, and let me go ahead and do the line again. And I'm just gonna, I want it to kind of just barely touch this nut like that, and I'll say okay. Okay, so I'll throw a dimension on here now. Wow, I was really close. I wanted it to be 55 and it was 55.9. I want this to be equal length to that. So I'm gonna say equal that edge and that edge, and you can see now they're equal length. And honestly, I really don't care how big that is right now. I'm just going to leave it alone. I know it's not a fully constrained sketch, but in this case it doesn't really matter right now. I might come back and define it a little bit later, but I now have that sketch. We'll use the flange command and check this out. I just created this open profile. It's not a rectangle or anything like that. It's an open profile, and if I click on this, I can start to drag, and you'll notice a couple issues. First of all, that I did, I didn't create a new sheet metal component. So I should have done that, and I should have done it before I did my sketch, but that's okay. I'm going to say new component, and we're going to call this plate, and I'm going to pick, I totally forgot to do this, the joys of live. So I'm going to pick that new material, 0.6, okay, flange. I'll click on that guy, start to drag, and now we notice much thinner material. Yay. Okay, what's the distance? I'm going to say we want it to be 25, so I'm going to say minus 25 in this case. Now you'll notice a couple issues. It's actually like inside the part right now. I could change this thickness to side 2, and you'll see that it goes inside like that. And that is what I want in this case. So you have the ability to specify which side, or you could even say symmetric, and so it kind of goes around, oops, sorry, my bad, right here, symmetric. And you can see it's going half the distance up and half the distance down. So I'm going to do side 2 in this case, and I'm just going to go ahead and say 25 millimeters. It does the bends for me automatically, which is pretty cool. I'll go ahead and say okay, but it's in the wrong spot, right? I used this face here to kind of create my profile. So let's go ahead and position it where it needs to be. So I'm going to say joint. I want it to be a rigid joint. And here's a neat little tip. I'm going to zoom up a little bit here. And if I hover over this line, you'll see that it has a start, a middle, and an end. So I'm going to just click on that middle point. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I want basically that edge to kind of ride along this edge here. I'm going to grab the middle point there, and we can now see that that is perfectly centered, and it's kind of sitting down where I want that to be. Now it's not sitting flush, but because this is bent, it really wouldn't do that. So it's basically lining up that edge with that other edge, and that's what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay, and it is now in the correct location. I know we're going through at a pretty good pace here. A lot of this is kind of repetitive, but you can kind of see how we're building things and positioning things where they need to be. Well, now I obviously need to have a hole in this sheet metal part. So I'm going to click on this face, right mouse click, and you'll notice that because I'm in the sheet metal, I don't see the hole command. Usually the hole command is over here. Okay. So I could go to create and do hole, or I could hit the H key and it brings up my hole command. So I'm going to do that. I'll click on this face. Now I do want this to be in a very specific position. And you'll notice as I'm moving around, some dimensions kind of are hopping on the screen a little bit. And this is that reference that you see right here. So I'm going to reference this left edge, and I want that to be 12.5 over. And then I'm going to come down here and reference this bottom edge, and I want that to be 24. And now you can see that's pretty much lined up with that nut. Okay, and maybe I could even come in here and say make that 23 or 23.5. I have some flexibility there on where I want that hole to be. In this case, I'm just going to say 24. What size? I want it to be a 10.5. So 10.5. Say OK. Oh, actually, I want it instead of distance. Again, I'm going to say 2. And pick that inside face, so it only goes through that sheet metal part. And there we go. We now have a hole through the sheet metal part. And you can kind of see what's going to happen here when we tighten this down. It's going to push the screw against this sheet metal flange back here, which is going to kind of bind it against this extension arm. So that's kind of the idea behind this. Okay, let's fill it. 6 millimeters. Again, I don't even have to rotate. I can just pick those two edges. Say okay. Okay. A couple questions. So Eyal made a really good point. He said, because Brad screwed up, where is the sheet metal sketch? Now, typically you say create a sheet metal component, and then the sketch is underneath that sheet metal component. That's how it's supposed to work. But because I forgot to do that, the sheet metal, let me switch over here. The sketch for that, if I expand open this plate, you'll notice that it doesn't have a sketches folder. But if I come in here, here is my sketch. So it's underneath my extension arm assembly. So it's right there. So yeah, not the best method. I didn't want to undo and redo my sketch and waste time and all kind of stuff. I should have. So Eyal, good point there. And then Stuart, kind of to add on to that, can you move a sketch to another component? So let's see. Can I just drag that sketch onto my plate? Cut and paste of a sketch with a dependent sheet metal feature is not supported, So unfortunately, in this case, it doesn't look like I can. Let me try and drag it underneath it, like into here maybe. Yeah. So in this example, it won't let me. In other situations, it might let you. And again, it's not always as cut and dry as you would expect it to be because where the sketch was created in time. So let me actually try one more thing. Let me activate the extension arm assembly, and now let me see if that will let me do it. I don't think it will. Yeah, it won't. So I should have undone my sketch and had it underneath my plate. So slap of the hand for me on that. Okay. And then somebody else asked the question, how would you go back and correct the reference of the hole? So on the sheet metal part, if I double click on my hole feature, you'll notice it says reference 1 selected, and it's at 12.5. Reference 2, 1 selected, is 24. So I could hit this little X right here and then select my reference. Now it should let me click on an edge. Let me go select. Maybe it won't. Oops, clicked wrong. That's a good question. I would have expected me to be able to reference that, and it's not letting me. Okay, I will have to delve deeper into why is it not letting me do that. Maybe I have to, let me clear both references and say reference. Yeah, it is interesting. So let's do face. Don't know. That's a great question. I will bring that up. I always thought you could go back and re-reference, but maybe you can't. Okay, so in that situation, basically what I would do is go before that and create another hole if need be or something like that and just suppress that hole there. But let's keep moving forward because I'm going to run out of time, unfortunately. And I do have a hard stop at the top of the hour. Okay, so to finish this up, I'm going to insert in another McMaster car component, which is a yellow plastic knob. So 2907 T27. I'm just going to search for that, and you can see it finds the 7-arm grip knob. And let me expand that guy open a little bit, say download. It's going to bring it in at my 00, my origin. So let's drag that over. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, okay, I could rotate it and all that kind of stuff, but because I'm going to create a joint, it doesn't really matter in this case. Now what does matter is where I want this face here to be flat with the sheet metal part basically. So I'm going to hover over this edge and it's going to grab that center point there. And then I'm going to come in over here and just hover over this face. And you can see I can grab that center point right there. Now I could also, and I'm not going to turn the parts off. I would probably turn this part off to actually grab the sheet metal part, but just because I'm falling behind in time, I'm just going to grab that point there, and you're going to see that it brings and lines up that point. And we can see that my hole is big enough for that to go through. I could make it a revolute if I wanted to. I'll go ahead and say okay. Change the appearance. I'm just going to hit A for appearance. That's the shortcut. I'm just going to drag that appearance on there like so. Okay. Cool. So the next thing I'm going to do is there's a plastic component that goes here. And I'm going to create a new component. So I made sure my extension arm is active. I'll say new component. Now notice it remembered my last component type was a sheet metal component. Well, I'm going to say I want it to be a standard component. And now I can come in and say, let's just call this frame end cap. And you'll see a new regular component called frame end cap. Let me minimize some of these guys. Okay. Just like before, let me switch to my solid tab. I'm going to create a primitive, a box primitive. And let's just do this maybe like on the side plane because it's kind of lined up with the side here. I'm just going to draw out in space somewhere, 30 by 30. And I want it to be pretty thin actually. I think it's only 3 millimeters. Now you're going to see some interesting things here. I'm going to purposely make a mistake and then we're going to fix that. And I think it's pretty cool. And it's actually a trick. I think Blaze Barrett actually showed me this trick. I want to give a shout out to him because I think he was the one that said, you should try this out. And you'll see that here in just a second. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is create a sketch on here. Do a rectangle. And I want to do a centered rectangle. Now you'll notice I don't have like a center point, but there's a really cool tip here. If I hover over this edge, you can see if I move, I get kind of this snap guide. So it's kind of found the center of that edge. Well, now I'm going to hover over the center of this edge, and now I have these two snap guides, and it actually shows me right where the center is. So I'm going to click there, and I found the center of that rectangle, of that face, I should say. But this is going to come back and bite us here in a little bit, and that's the tip I was going to show you. So I'm going to say 28, 28. I'll say OK. I'll rotate a little bit isometric. I'm still in my sketch, but I can go ahead and select this profile, right mouse click, and say extrude. And it finishes my sketch for me automatically. I can come in and type in my distance. Let's just say 10 millimeters. Say OK. Now I want to shell this guy out. So I'm going to grab that face, say shell 3.5 according to my outline. Now I want to fillet a bunch of edges, and this is kind of a little bit difficult to do. I have to click this edge and then say fillet, and then I have to come in and select these other edges, potentially rotate around, all that kind of stuff. Well, here's a neat trick. So I'm going to say fillet, and then I'm just going to draw a box like so. And I'm just going to kind of grab those two edges, and let's just do 2 millimeters. Then I'm going to hold down my Shift key. I want to add some extra stuff. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key. I'm just going to draw a selection box around, I'm sorry, Control key. My bad. Control key, and it should let me do that. Why is it not? Man, I am not having much luck today, am I? Control. That is, I'm getting weird results, guys. Let me try it down here. Shift key. Maybe it's Control Shift. There we go. Sorry, my bad. Control Shift. Okay, so let me start over. I was getting weird results, and I want to make sure I'm showing this correctly. So I'm going to say fillet, draw a box, and you'll notice if I stop moving, it says specify fillet radius, so I'm going to say 2. And then it says hold Control to modify selection. So if I hold down my Control key, now it says select edges, faces, or features and stuff like that. So I could come in and click. Well, I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, and that's going to allow me to add in extra edges. So I'm just kind of drawing boxes like so. Now be careful. Don't draw too big. But like, for example, if I start up here, it's going to select this inside edge. So for example, if I do that, I get the edges that I want, but I also get this extra edge I don't want. But I can always come in and just unselect it. And I've now selected 8 edges using kind of like a window selection. I couldn't just draw a big box around the whole thing. It would select every edge, but I was able to kind of control my windows and grab what I want. Not the smoothest method, that I showed, but let's go ahead and select this face, and let's do a 1.5, and check this out. I clicked on the face, and it grabbed all of the edges that have to do with the face and filleted those. Now I could have grabbed just an edge, and because chain is on, it would have gone all the way around. But I like to show that you can actually click on a face and it'll select all of the edges that are on that face. So we'll go ahead and say OK, and we now have that guy. Okay. Now this fits into the end of the metal piece, and right now it would be a pretty tight fit. You'd probably have to really hammer the thing in. So there's basically some grooves that are created in here. That allows some flexibility. So I'm going to actually edit this original sketch. Let me kind of zoom out here. And I'm going to create a offset of this rectangle here. And let's just do 2 millimeters. I'll say OK. And hopefully you guys are cluing in on what's going on here, but you'll notice that my sketch is not fully constrained, and that's going to come back to bite us here in a little bit. I'm foreshadowing. I'm going to go ahead and extrude this profile. Oops, let me cancel out. I'll finish my sketch. That way we can kind of see what's going on here. And I'll expand this guy open so you can kind of see. So I'm going to grab this profile here and say extrude. And as I start to drag in this direction, you're going to see it's going to cut some material away. So I want to go 3 millimeters into the part, and we want to cut that material. So I just created that little groove there. Well, I want another one. Well, I could extrude again with an offset and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just going to say pattern. Let's pattern this extrude feature. Which direction? I'm just going to pick like a line or an edge or something like that that kind of defines the direction. I'm going to start to drag, and it's going to give me kind of a preview of what it's doing here. Okay, well, I only want 2 in that direction. And I'm going to say extent, and the distance I want is to be 5. So you can almost think of it as just a single pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And it took that one and it created a pattern of it. So could have copied and pasted, I could have re-extruded with an offset, or I just used a pattern in this case. Okay, then one more thing here. I'm going to go back and edit the original sketch. Draw a rectangle, and I want to do a centered rectangle. And I'm going to click on this edge right here, and you'll notice it kind of finds the center for me automatically. And I'm going to start to move. Now the height is really important, so I'm going to type in 8, and then I'm going to hit Tab. Now watch what happens when I come over and try and click on this edge. You'll notice that it doesn't snap to it. But if I move up here where that little plus symbol is, you'll see that it does snap to it. So if you're trying to move and it doesn't snap, try going to the other opposite corner, and you'll see that sure enough, it's going to do a coincident constraint for me right there. I'll do the same thing here. Height needs to be 8. I'll tab over. If I get near this edge, I don't get anything, but if I come up there, it snaps. I'll say OK. Now, here's the thing. Watch what happens if I grab this point. My whole sketch moves. Now, why is that? Well, it was because I did those snap guides. Remember those blue dashed lines? It's just a guide. It's nothing like a constraint or anything like that. So how would I fix this? Well, some of you might be able to draw a line from corner to corner and then make that point the midpoint of that line. That would absolutely work. But this is the tip I think Blaze, hopefully that's correct, I think he's the one that showed me this, is to hold down that shift key when you're doing a horizontal vertical. And this is kind of cool to watch. So I'm going to say horizontal vertical, and I want this point to be vertical with the center of this edge right here, but you'll notice nothing's really showing up. But if I hold down my shift key, you'll see it's going to find the center or the midpoint of this line. So watch what happens when I click there. You'll see some of my lines turn black. The ones that can't move horizontal anymore. Okay, so now let me do the same thing again. I'm still in my horizontal vertical. I'm going to click that point there. I'm going to come over here, hold down my shift key, and you can see that icon appear. I'll click there, and notice my sketch is now fully constrained. I'll finish my sketch. We'll turn this guy back on, and then I can use these outside profiles. Let me grab that guy there. Say extrude to object. I mean, I could say all, but I don't want it to go backwards, so I'm going to say to object. I'm going to grab this front face, and we can see that it's going to extrude that front face like so. And we now have this piece of plastic that can kind of snap into the end much easier. In fact, I'm going to hit A for appearance. grab our existing black plastic texture that we've been using. Okay, and then I want to position where it needs to go. We're going to go a few minutes over. I hope my customer I have a customer call at the top of the hour, so hopefully he won't mind being a few minutes late because I want to kind of finish this up. I'm going to say, let's create a joint, a rigid joint, and check this out. I'm going to hover over this face right here because this is kind of what's going to touch the metal part. And if I rotate a little bit, you'll notice there is a tick mark right at the center. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that guy there, and it's on the plane of this face right here. I'll zoom out a little bit. We'll zoom up on this guy, but you'll notice there's not something in the middle. But if I zoom up just a little bit more and I hover over this flat face here, I can actually click that point there, and you see it perfectly snaps into place. We can kind of see how that, you know, slides into place there. I'll say okay. Okay, and then the last step basically is we want to copy this whole arm assembly and put it over here. So to do that, I'm going to activate my top level assembly. So Ethan said he's a huge fan of the horizontal vertical constraints. Yep, I totally agree, especially that shortcut. I always forget about it, but that shift to catch to the center I think is a huge time saver instead of drawing a construction line and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so we have this whole extension arm assembly. I'm going to right mouse click on it and say move copy. Now the first thing I want to do, make sure it's set to components, which it is. The first thing I want to do is say create copy before I do anything else. Then I can start to rotate and watch what it does. It creates a copy of it. I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees, and maybe we just kind of move it sort of kind of where it needs to be, just over here somewhere. I'll say okay, and we now have an extension arm assembly 2. So there's the original, there's the new guy, and then all we have to do is create a joint. Let's do a slider joint because we want it to slide. And I want the center of this to slide through the center of that opening there. So I'm going to, again, use the between two faces. I want to find the center between that face and this face. Now watch the snap. And this is kind of hard to see, but it basically created a plane that slices through the middle of it. And then as I hover over this face, you can see a face has a start, a middle, and an end. And we can see this middle point right here. When I click on that, it actually grabbed the middle of that pipe. And then the same thing over here. I'm going to say between two faces, between that face there and that face there. What's my snap? Now you'll notice when I hover over this face, it has that plane kind of in the middle, and that middle point is right there. So I'm going to go ahead and click. Now my slider is going in the wrong direction, but that is an easy fix. Let's go x-axis. Zoom out a little bit. We can see that that works. And you're all going, well, how come it didn't move all that? Well, as soon as I say okay, it knows that those all have to stay together. In fact, if I were to drag that arm, we can see that all of those move together. There's the sheet metal parts we've created, all that kind of stuff. And these are individual. I can change the lengths of either of those or the positions of either of those. Okay, I know that was a lot. We went just a few minutes over, but this is kind of the end of the series here. I'm gonna, like I said, I'm probably gonna do one more on doing like an exploded view with a parts list and all that kind of stuff. So keep an eye out for that. I want to check the questions. It looks like the questions are all good. So again, thank you everybody for attending. Sorry for the few little technical difficulties we had, and hope to see you on a future live stream. Have fun fusioning.